1. The Forgotten Beach House. It was the summer of 2017 when my friend Daniel invited me to spend a long weekend with him at his family's beach house in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The plan was simple: sun, sand, barbecues, and a break from the stress of our jobs back in Raleigh. Daniel always spoke about this place like it was some hidden paradise. His family had owned the property for decades, but in recent years, it had gone mostly unused. When we pulled up after a 4-hour drive, the house immediately struck me as different. It wasn't the kind of bright, modern beach house you see on travel websites. No, this one looked older, almost out of place. Faded white paint peeled off the siding, and the wooden steps leading up to the porch groaned with every step. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and seaweed, but also something else, something damp, almost moldy, that seemed to seep from the very bones of the house. "Man, this place has character," I said, trying to make light of it. Daniel laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, it's been empty for a while. My parents haven't been out here in years." Inside, the house felt stuck in time. Faded curtains hung limply, and the furniture looked like it belonged to the 1980s. Family photos lined the hallway, though most of them were sun-bleached from years of exposure. It was cozy in its own way, but there was something unsettling about how untouched everything felt, like the house had been waiting, watching, for someone to come back. That first night, after a day of unpacking and a quick walk on the beach, we sat out on the porch with a couple of beers. The ocean waves roared in the distance, and the night was humid, the air heavy with the smell of salt. But, as the hours passed, I started noticing sounds that didn't belong to the ocean. Faint knocks, creaks inside the house. By morning, the house seemed normal again. Sunlight spilled through the windows, and Daniel was already making coffee. When I told him about the sounds, he brushed it off. "You've been watching too many horror movies, man," he laughed. We spent the day exploring the beach, swimming in the Atlantic, and trying to shake off the weirdness of the night before. But as dusk settled in, that same heaviness returned. After dinner, we decided to explore the house a little. There was a narrow staircase leading up to a small attic space. Dust clung to everything, and cobwebs stretched across the beams. Old boxes sat stacked in the corners, filled with yellowed newspapers, faded clothes, and forgotten toys. But one box in particular caught my attention. Inside was a stack of photographs, most of them showing the house from different decades. There was one picture that made my stomach tighten. It was of the living room, the very same room we had been sitting in earlier, but in the photo, there was a figure standing near the window. A tall, shadowy silhouette. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but the figure's outline was too defined. It was there, watching. "Daniel, who's this?" I asked, holding up the photo. He looked at it and froze. I don't know. That's weird. None of my family would have been in that picture, and this is our house." We both laughed it off, but uneasily. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. The sound was back, footsteps. Only this time, they were on the stairs. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, as the creaking grew louder, closer. The steps stopped right outside my bedroom door. For what felt like an eternity, there was silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. I couldn't breathe. My throat went dry. I wanted to call out for Daniel, but no words came. I pulled the covers over my head like a terrified child, and eventually, Exhaustion pulled me back into an uneasy sleep. In the morning, I asked Daniel if he had come to my room during the night. He swore he hadn't. His face went pale when I mentioned the knocking. I had a dream, he said. I thought I saw someone standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, thin, just standing there, not moving. We didn't talk much after that. The house felt heavier by the hour. Even during the day, we would catch shadows darting across the hallway, or feel sudden cold drafts sweep through the rooms. On our last night, we were both too uneasy to sleep. We sat in the living room with the lights on, drinking, trying to laugh it off. But then, all at once, we bolted out of that house and sat in the car until morning, too scared to go back inside. When Daniel's parents later went to check on the property, they called him in shock. The upstairs hallway, where we had heard the footsteps night after night, was covered in deep scratches along the walls, like something had been clawing its way through. We never went back. To this day, whenever I hear the sound of footsteps in an empty hallway, I'm transported back to that forgotten beach house. The one that seemed to watch us, to wait for us, and to remind us that some places were never meant to be lived in again. Story 2. The Rental by the Shore. Back in the summer of 2019, my girlfriend Emily and I decided to take a short vacation along the Gulf Coast of Florida. We had been dating for about a year, and this was supposed to be our getaway. A chance to relax, reconnect, and escape the noise of our busy city lives. We searched online for rentals and found a charming little beach house just outside of Destin. The photos made it look perfect. Oceanfront, wide porch, big windows that face the water. The price was surprisingly low for the location, which should have been a red flag, but we convinced ourselves it was just our lucky break. When we arrived, the house looked exactly like the pictures, almost too exactly. The shutters were the same bright blue, the porch chairs were arranged in the same way, and even the towels hanging inside matched the ones in the listing. It was as if the house had been staged, frozen in time. Inside, everything felt spotless but oddly sterile. There were no personal touches, no signs of previous guests, just empty, pristine rooms. Still, we told ourselves it was fine. We spent the afternoon walking the beach, swimming, and watching the sunset. That first night, things began to feel off. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of Emily whispering my name. "Mark, do you hear that?" she asked. I held my breath. At first, all I could hear was the steady crash of waves outside. But then, faintly, I caught it. A soft thumping sound coming from the floor above us. The problem was, the house didn't have an upstairs. We checked the whole place, top to bottom. There was no second floor, no attic. Just one level. Yet the sound continued, like someone pacing above us. We finally managed to fall asleep around 3 a.m., telling ourselves it had to be the wind or maybe raccoons on the roof. The next day was normal enough. We swam, cooked, and lounged around. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, we had almost forgotten about the noises. But that night, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., Emily shook me awake. "There's someone outside," she whispered. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the sliding glass doors that led to the porch. For a split second I saw it. A figure standing outside. Not moving, just watching us through the glass. I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtain open, but the porch was empty. No footprints in the sand. No sign of anyone. We didn't sleep much that night. On the third day, we decided to explore the area. At a local cafe, I struck up a conversation with the owner, an older woman who had lived there her whole life. When I mentioned the house we were staying in, her expression changed instantly. "You're in that house?" she asked, lowering her voice. I nodded. "Yeah, why?" She hesitated before leaning in. "That place has a history. Belonged to the Reddick family. About 10 years ago, their daughter went missing. They searched everywhere, but she was never found. Some folks say she drowned. Others, well, they say she never left the house." Emily squeezed my hand under the table. We both forced a laugh, but inside, I felt cold. That night, as if on cue, the strange noises returned. The thumping above us grew louder, angrier, until it sounded like furniture was being dragged across a non-existent upstairs floor. At one point, the lights flickered and the TV turned on by itself, static filling the screen. Then came the voice, a faint, childlike giggle. It echoed from the hallway, soft but clear. Emily grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But something inside me refused. I told her we'd make it through one more night and check out in the morning. Maybe I didn't want to admit I was scared. Maybe I just wanted to prove the stories wrong. Around 3 a.m., I woke up alone. Panic shot through me as I realized Emily wasn't in bed. I called her name, but there was no answer. Then, I heard it. The sound of laughter again, coming from the living room. I ran out, and my blood ran cold. Emily was standing in front of the sliding doors, facing the beach. Her eyes were wide open, but she wasn't blinking. She wasn't moving. "Emily!" I shouted, shaking her. She didn't respond. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed toward the glass. I turned to look and saw the reflection. A girl, maybe 13. Pale skin, wet hair hanging over her face. She was standing behind us in the room, even though when I spun around, the space was empty. Emily gasped and collapsed into my arms. That broke whatever hold the house had on her. We didn't wait until morning. We grabbed our things and left in the middle of the night, driving until we found a cheap motel 2 towns over. The next day, we contacted the rental company and canceled the rest of our stay. They didn't seem surprised when we mentioned what happened. In fact, the woman on the phone said only one thing before hanging up. "You stayed longer than most." To this day, Emily refuses to talk about it. Whenever I bring it up, her face goes pale. Story 3. Screams Beneath the Tides. In the summer of 2015, my cousin Ryan invited me and 2 of our friends, Jake and Sarah, to spend a week at his parents' old beach house on the coast of Maine. Unlike the sunny beaches of Florida or California, Maine's shoreline had a rugged, isolated feel. Jagged rocks, cold waters, and an almost permanent mist in the evenings. The house itself sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, weathered by decades of storms. From the moment we arrived, I felt uneasy. The house loomed like a sentinel, its wooden frame groaning in the salty wind. The locals in town gave us strange looks when we mentioned where we were staying. One old fisherman muttered something like, "That place should have stayed empty." We laughed it off, eager for adventure. The first few days went smoothly. We grilled on the deck, explored tide pools, and stayed up late swapping stories. But on the third night, things began to shift. We were sitting around the fire pit when Sarah froze. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first I thought it was just the crashing waves, but then I heard it too. A distant, drawn-out scream carried by the wind. It didn't sound like seagulls or the usual coastal noises. It sounded human. Jake tried to dismiss it. Probably kids messing around on the beach. But when we looked, the beach below was empty. Just dark sand and the restless ocean. That night, as I lay in bed, the scream came again. Louder this time. Closer. I pressed my face into the pillow, trying to block it out, but the sound seemed to seep into the walls. By morning, we were all on edge. Ryan admitted he'd heard it too, but he didn't want to freak us out. "It happens sometimes," he said. "My parents told me about it when I was younger. They called it the tide's cry. We tried to laugh it off, but none of us could shake the chill. We tried to convince ourselves it was a shared hallucination, but deep down we knew better." That night the screaming started again, only now it came from inside the house. I was the first to hear it. A woman's voice, shrill and desperate, echoing through the halls. I ran into the living room and the others came stumbling in from their rooms, all pale and wide-eyed. The sound surrounded us, filling every corner. Then the floorboards began to shake. From the windows we saw water rising, waves slamming against the cliff, climbing higher and higher, as though the ocean itself was trying to swallow the house. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. She was pointing at the hallway mirror. In the glass, instead of our reflections, we saw 4 pale figures standing behind us, soaked, bloated, eyes wide with horror. Drowned people. We spun around, but the room was empty. When we looked back at the mirror, the figures were closer, their mouths opening in silent screams. That broke us. We grabbed our bags, our keys, whatever we could, and bolted. The house seemed to groan as we ran, the walls vibrating with the sound of rushing water. When we finally reached the car and sped down the coastal road, we could still hear it. The screaming, carried on the wind, fading only when the house disappeared from sight. The next day, Ryan called his parents and told them what had happened. They weren't surprised. They admitted the house had a dark history. Decades ago, before his family owned it, the land had belonged to a fisherman who was rumored to have drowned his own wife and children during a storm. Their bodies were never recovered. Locals claimed their screams could still be heard when the tide was high. Ryan's parents sold the property not long after. But sometimes, late at night, I'll dream of that staircase leading down into the waves. I'll hear the cries beneath the tides, desperate voices calling out for help. And I'll wake with the taste of salt water in my mouth. And in those moments I realize something terrible. Some